As we continue in this book of Ephesians, last chapter we talked about, in a sense, the whole chapter is about the power and the purpose of God. And in the first half of the chapter, the power and the purpose of God for an individual is to make you a new creation. And that's why we talked about being the gospel transforms us from death to life. And in the second half of the chapter, the power and purpose of God through the gospel for us is to move from being divided to becoming united in the gospel, right? And so Paul introduces that in chapter 3. He kind of gives a glimpse of that even further. And though that's not the main thing he's talking about, I want to mention that because we're talking about Jews and Gentiles who are in intense hostility, intense hatred with each other. They don't even sit with each other. They don't eat with each other. They don't even meet each other on the road. I mean, that's just intense hostility, hatred between these two groups. And here is Paul now, he's saying the gospel has broken the dividing wall. It's brought these two groups together. The power of the cross, it's brought them together. There is a new bond, but he gives a glimpse into what a great bond that is. Because in this chapter, he's going to talk about how Paul, a Jew, is in prison for the sake of the Gentiles. Are you tracking me? Here is Paul. No, he's not just shaking their hands. He's not just having dinner with them. He's not just having them in his home. The gospel has transformed him in such a way and broken the dividing wall, the hatred and hostility in such an extent where he is even willing to go to prison for the sake of Gentiles. That is the power of the gospel we're talking about here. That is the transformation of the resurrection we're talking about here. It's not just being nice to one another. Oh, the gospel is so different, right? So he is talking about it. He's alluding to that. But even as we get into this in chapter 3, he's beginning chapter 3, verse 1, but then he takes a kind of a detour. He takes a digression, a turn, and then he comes back to it, right? And so let's just see what is that? Where is the digression, right? Look at verse 3, chapter 3, verse 1. Chapter 3, verse 1. He says, "For this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner of Jesus, on behalf of you Gentiles." And then he takes a kind of a digression, right? From verse 2 to verse 12. He takes a digression. Well, actually, verse 13. He takes a digression, right? I'm going to tell you why. Because if you look at verse 14, you know what he says in verse 14? What does it say? He says, what? Verse 14? For this reason. He is beginning that thought in verse 1. In verse 1, he says, "For this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner of Jesus," and then he goes into a digression, and he picks it back in verse 14. Now, what he intends to do is actually pray. He's finished chapter 2. He wants to pray now. Same way in chapter 1. He finishes a section, he prays. Chapter 2, he finishes a section, and he wants to pray. But before praying, he says something, and he goes to a digression. We're going to talk about why that's important. It's powerful. It's so practical for us. We'll talk about that. And then he picks it up in verse 14, right? But before we go into the digression, what is he talking about? And that's helpful for us. If you look at what he is speaking in those verses, one word that keeps coming back again and again, the word is mystery. The word is mystery, right? You look at it in verse 3, right? Verse 3. You look at it in verse 4. There's the word mystery showing up again. You look at it in verse 6. You look at it in verse 9. Right? Even in the short section, it's repeated again and again. Why? What is this mystery? Paul is actually referring to the gospel as a mystery. Okay? Now, why is the gospel a mystery? What's mysterious about the gospel? Now, I want us to understand the word mystery itself, because in our modern English and our understanding, the word mystery, when we think of the word mystery, we think of a puzzle that needs to be solved, like a mystery novel or a mystery show. So the detective or people come and they try to find these clues and they solve something and the mystery is solved. But for Paul and the Greek language, the word mystery is not that. This is not what the word mystery means. In the Greek language, the word mystery is something that something needs to be revealed which can never be discovered on your own sake, by your own. It cannot be discovered. That is what a mystery means. A mystery is something that you cannot discover yourself. You cannot land on this. You cannot just find some clues and come up with a conclusion. No, it has to be revealed to you. That is the mystery he's talking about. And so in that context, he's saying the gospel is a mystery. What he's saying is the gospel is not something you can land with your own logical conclusion. The gospel is not something you can reason yourself and finally say, oh, well, yeah, wonderful, I really like the gospel. No, you cannot. The gospel is mysterious because you can never land on the gospel. It is not, you are not able to fathom the gospel. It is not common sense. That is why the gospel is mystery. Okay? Let me help you understand this, right? The reason why this is important. See, because if the Bible is about, if God says to you, hey, obey the 10 commandments. You know the 10 commandments are in the Bible, right? The 10 commandments. Do not steal, do not, whatever, all that list of 10 commandments. If God tells you, obey the 10 commandments and you will be saved. Okay? It makes complete sense. That's not a mystery. It makes complete sense. That's what all religious philosophies say. You follow these 5 things, you follow these 3 things, you follow these 10 things, you do these rituals, you do these sacrifices, you will be saved, you will please God, you will be accepted, all of that. You will earn your salvation, right? It makes complete sense. There's nothing mysterious about it. But the gospel is not that. The gospel is not. The gospel is completely counterintuitive. You cannot land on the gospel with your own logic and with your understanding unless God reveals it to you. Because why? Because he says it's a mystery. The gospel is God sending his son Jesus to die in your place. It's not common sense. How is that possible? Why can't anybody else come up with this, with this idea? What is this? Why would God come and die? Why would God send his son Jesus, the divine one, the Son of God, to come and to suffer for us? He's not winning battles for us. He's suffering on the cross and dying a shameful death. How is that my salvation? It's a mystery. How is it that God tells you, yes, I have chosen you before the foundations of this world, I've redeemed you and I've adopted you, and yet I'm working through your repentance and your faith and your human response? How does this work? That is why the gospel is a mystery. It's a mystery. You cannot land on this by yourself. Right? And so Paul says, man, this gospel is a mystery, and God has revealed it. He has revealed it. He has chosen to reveal it to us. Otherwise, we cannot solve this. We cannot understand this. And this is why I want to encourage you, because some of you, and I know it is true, and as we grow and as we keep understanding, and we struggle with these categories. We struggle with all that. We struggle with grace. We struggle with the sovereignty of God. We struggle with our responsibility. We struggle with all of these things. And I want to tell you, this is how religion works. Religion and the works kind of based system. This is how religious philosophy works. Religious philosophy makes sense in the moment. But over time, it will crush you. You cannot live up to it. You tracking me? Religion will make sense immediately. But over time, it will crush you. The gospel may not make sense in the moment. But over time, as you grow in the grace of God, it will free you. It will liberate you. It will transform you. And I want to encourage you. Maybe you're just hearing about this for the first time. Maybe this is something new for you. And I want to encourage you. It may not make sense right now, but as you continue to entrust what you don't know to God, and as you receive what he is telling you, man, there is something that's going to change. You're going to sense his power in your life. That's the mystery he's talking about. Now, he's talking about it for a purpose, for a reason. Now, what is the digression? Why is he talking about this? Let's look at verse 13. Verse 13 kind of summarizes his digression, right? It tells you why he digresses. Okay, verse 13. Right, it says, so I ask you not to lose heart over what I'm suffering for you, which is your glory. That is the crux of why he's digressing. He's telling, hey, the reason why I'm telling all this from verse 2 to verse 12 is so that you will not be discouraged. You will not lose heart for what I'm suffering, over what I'm suffering for you. Right? Now, what's happening? Paul begins verse 1 and he says, I, Paul, a prisoner of Jesus. And the moment he writes it, he realizes, because he's a pastor, because he loves his people, the moment he says, I'm a prisoner of Christ, he realizes his current suffering and circumstance is an issue of great discouragement for people. Now, people who are reading this are greatly troubled that he's in prison. They are not able to fathom this. They are not able to understand how is Paul in prison? Isn't he the one who's sharing the gospel? Isn't he one doing all these wonderful things? Why would God put Paul in prison? Why is this? It doesn't make sense. So he understands his suffering is a cause of discouragement for people. So he loves his people, so he wants to pause there, and he's going to talk about why and how he is processing his suffering to encourage his people before jumping into the prayer. Are you tracking me? So today we're going to use that. We're going to see how is Paul processing his suffering, and how is he encouraging the church during that time, and how can we understand what he is saying, right? So we're going to apply some of these things to us. Now, what you will notice that Paul, the way Paul is dealing with suffering is not how typically we deal with suffering. This is why it's a mystery for you. Now, when we deal with suffering, right, when we go through suffering, and suffering could be anything, right? We are not talking about being foolish, right? We're not talking about being like making foolish decisions and inviting suffering. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about just regular suffering. We're talking about suffering like a fracture. It may not be a suffering for you. It is a suffering for me. I'm not able to go everywhere I want to. I'm not able to meet people. It is a difficult kind of moment. It's a suffering. It's as simple as that. It's a very silly thing, but it's as simple as it could be a sickness. It could be some health issue. It could be maybe in your workplace. Suffering could be, hey, maybe they're not giving you a promotion. Maybe you have a tough boss who's not treating you well, right? Or it could be even something as explicit as somebody is opposing you for the sake of Christ. So suffering can come in various forms. So we're going to see what Paul is going to do. Any of these suffering in your life, Paul is not doing this. Firstly, he is not becoming cynical about his suffering. Suffering will make you cynical. You're tracking me? It will make you cynical. Right? It's very easy to fall into self-pity when you're suffering. Oh, I'm like this. Nobody cares about me. Why is this happening only to me? Oh, this is why. What is the use of praying? What is the use of coming to church? If I can get a fracture, what is the use? We go into this, why we think our suffering is the worst thing. So we get into a very cynical mindset. Okay? Paul is not cynical. He's not giving a cynical solution. Secondly, Paul is not going to give you a psychology approach. Psychology approach meaning, hey, cut it out. Ranjit, cut it out. Come on, do it. You can do this. Right? Just keep praying, keep working hard, just keep smiling. Right? Just keep smiling, the fracture will go away. Right? Just do all these things. There's no psychology approach here. There's no try harder. Right? No. The world will tell you that. There are things that work in the world and which is fine. Paul is not going to tell you that. He's not giving you a psychology approach. He's not giving you a sentimental approach. What is sentimental approach? Sentimental is, hey, you know what? All things will work together. Don't worry, right? Don't worry. Even this fracture, it's for the glory of God, right? I'm like, dude, I'm the one facing the fracture here, right? Anyway, I'm using my example as just an example, right? Sometimes we go into the sentimental approach. Is that true? Is it true? All things work together? Yes. It is sometimes too soon to say it, right? When somebody is suffering, we don't go into the sentimental. We don't say everything will work out. No, don't just wait and see how God is going to do a miracle. No, don't. Let's not say all those things. Let's not be sentimental. Paul is not sentimental. And lastly, Paul is not philosophical. Right? Paul is not philosophical. He's not like, hey, you know what? There is no rose without a thorn. Think about that. Right? What is that? What doesn't kill you? See, we know all this. We don't know the Bible verse, but we know what makes it. This is when we are suffering, we are thinking, oh, come on, Ranjit, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yes, Jesus, thank you. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. We think of all this when you're going through suffering. No, Paul is not giving you a philosophical approach, right? What is Paul doing? Man, I'm telling you, if you can lean in and listen and understand what Paul is doing, I'm telling you, this is a dynamite when you go through suffering. It is something powerful that's happening here, right? So firstly, I've titled this sermon, Suffering Well for Christ. Right? Suffering well for Christ. All suffering in some way, you're suffering for Christ. Okay? Right? I will kind of explain that a little bit, but the fracture is suffering for Christ. When you lose a job, you're suffering for Christ. It's not that you have to explicitly suffer for Christ, but all suffering in some way you're suffering for Christ. And I'm going to tell you how it is, right? So suffering well for Christ. So firstly in this passage, we're going to see the power in the midst of suffering. Where does Paul get his power? Where is the source of power for Paul? Right? Look at verse 1. It says, "For this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner of Christ, on behalf of you Gentiles." Okay, we're going to pause there because there's something that's happening here. He's not saying, "I'm a prisoner of Rome." He's not saying, "I'm a prisoner of Caesar." Obviously, Rome probably has put him in, or some leaders have put him in. He's not saying, "I'm a prisoner of these people. I'm not a political prisoner. I'm not a religious." He's not saying. He's saying, "I'm a prisoner of Christ." What does that mean? What does that mean? He's saying, "I'm Christ's prisoner." Right? In some way, what he's saying, "I'm in prison for Christ. I'm Christ's prisoner. Christ has put me in prison." Okay? So when you say you're a prisoner of Rome, Rome has put you in prison. When you say you're a prisoner of Caesar, Caesar has put you in prison. When you say you're a prisoner of Christ, Christ has put you in prison. Now, we don't like this. Right? Like, Ranjit, I don't know where this is going. What are you doing here? Christ has put you in prison. Doesn't the Bible say? What are the promises in the Bible? Right? Look at Isaiah 54, verse 17. It says, "No weapon that is fashioned against you will succeed." What about this? What is this? What about this verse then? What about Psalm 46:1? "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." Psalm 34:7. "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them." Luke 21:18, "Not a single hair from your head will fall without his knowledge." What about these verses? What is this? What are you talking about? Christ has put him in prison. Why is Paul saying, "I'm a prisoner of Christ"? What about these verses? What use are these promises if it is not applicable to Paul? So this is where I want to gently encourage you. I want to gently nudge you in your theology of suffering. I want to understand, our theology of suffering is usually skewed a little bit, right? It's not fully formed. We don't understand the theology of suffering. And a lot of times in our culture, it is erroneous. Our theology of suffering is erroneous. We love God, but we don't understand the theology of suffering, right? This is how we think. This is how we are raised to think. We are raised to think God blesses those who obey him, and God punishes those who disobey. Huh? Right? We are raised to think like that. Is that true? Is it? No, man, I know so many people who blatantly disobey God and are doing well in life. Right? What is this then? God blesses those who obey him, God punishes those who disobey him. No, it's not true. It's not biblical. Right? God blesses good people and God punishes bad people. Is that true? No. I know a lot of bad people who are doing really well in life. I know a lot of good people who are suffering in life. It's not true. It's not biblical. Good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. Oh, really? No. And so we are raised with this idea, right? This is a moralistic kind of a worldview. So we are raised with this in our culture. So immediately we push back, right? When bad things happen to us, we're like, man, maybe God doesn't love me. When bad things happen to us, maybe God has forgotten me. When bad things happen to us, we even go to the extent, like, maybe I've sinned. Maybe I'm bad. Maybe I've committed something. Maybe God is punishing me. No, my friends. No, that is not how we understand suffering, right? Paul is suffering. Paul is in prison. He's going to tell us he is chained in prison. In Ephesians, he's going to talk about it. He's chained. He's not able to freely move. I'm sure he's beaten in prison. He doesn't have food. He's not able to meet people. He's in a lonely, dark dungeon. It's a Turkish prison in modern day history. Right? He is forgotten. Nobody is able to meet him. He is put there unjustly. He didn't do anything wrong. They've unjustly accused him and put him inside. He's forgotten. He's rotting in prison. Has Paul committed a sin to be in prison? No. Is Paul a bad man? Is he a bad person? No. That's not what's happening here. Has Paul disobeyed God? No. Is Paul not praying enough? No. What's happening here? Why is he in prison? Why is he suffering? Paul is going to push our understanding of suffering a little further. He's saying, you know what? Yeah, you keep the why. Let me tell you, Jesus put me in prison. Jesus put me in prison. My circumstances are because Jesus allowed this to me. And he's okay with that. He's okay with that. Now, I want us to think about this. And I want to think about it in two ways. Do you face suffering because you're a follower of Jesus? Even a hint of suffering because you follow Jesus? Do you face a hint of rejection because you're a follower of Jesus? Or are you like what I call this Christian ninja? Right? You know what a Christian ninja? You know what a Christian ninja is? Christian ninja is somebody, like ninjas, they come in the dark, we don't understand who the ninjas, they're very mysterious, we don't know what their identity is, they're always covered in masks. You know what I'm saying? That's the ninja kind of idea, right? In movies and stuff like that. Christian ninja is somebody who is in this workplace. I mean, you're working with your colleagues for 20 years. They have no idea you're a Christian. You're like this ninja. Nobody knows who you are, where you came, where you're going. Nobody knows, right? You're with your friends for 10 years. They know you. Nobody knows you're a believer. Nobody knows you follow Jesus. You have just done a Christian matrix, right? You have just evaded all questions in your life, and you've managed to live somehow without anybody ridiculing you, anybody opposing you, anybody challenging your worldviews. How? It's amazing. You need an Oscar, right? You need an Oscar. I know it's funny. We all do this. See, the Bible says, man, if you follow Jesus, you don't have to be crazy. We're not talking about crazy nonsense here, right? You don't have to be crazy. If you follow Jesus, your values in this world will completely oppose the values of what's happening. Your values in the kingdom, the values in Scripture, it is diametrically opposite. If you follow Jesus, what you value, what you treasure, what you want in life is be completely different from what the world wants. And when you seriously follow Jesus, you will face opposition. You will face rejection. You will face questions. And so I want to gently ask you, if you are not facing a hint of rejection and you've done the matrix all your life, are you living for Jesus? You will face suffering. You are not exempt from suffering. When you live for Jesus, you will face suffering. But when you face suffering, how do you think about this? When you face suffering, Paul is expecting, Paul understands, he's in prison. He's okay with going to prison. He's okay with suffering because he's living for Jesus. But how is he processing this? He's saying, Jesus put me in prison. I want you to understand this, right? That's why I'm kind of laboring in this. I want you to understand. See, it's very easy to sing this. Very easy to sing, God gave, God takes away. God gives, God takes away, right? And Job and the song, right? Blessed be your name. It's very easy to sing that. I'm not saying, we all sing that. But do you really believe that? Do you really understand that? When you lose a job, can you say, well, God gave me this job, God took this job away, blessed be his name? Can you really believe and say this? Because when you say this, there's going to be consequence. You can't say that and then be angry and bitter, right? You can't do that. When you say this, when you say, well, God gave me good health, God took away good health, and maybe I have sickness that is never going to be cured, but blessed be the name of the Lord. Maybe God gave me friends, but God took away these friends. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Maybe there are prayers that I want to be answered. There are longings that I'm praying for, I'm longing for, and yet God is not answering my prayer. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Are you tracking me? Are we able to say that? How is Paul able to say that? Because Paul is able to say much more. How is Paul processing this? Let me tell you how. Where does he get the power? He gets the power from the gospel. He's applying the gospel to his suffering. Okay? This is not do 5 things. No, no, no. He's applying the gospel to suffering. Let me show you how he's applying. Look at verse 8. Verse 8 is the crux of it. Verse 8 is his understanding of the gospel. He's saying the gospel is a mystery that's been revealed. He's saying he's a privilege to be a minister of the gospel. Those are the couple of themes he's talking about. Verse 8, he says, to me, though I am the very least of all the saints, this grace was given. Man, how he understands the gospel. Right? This is where the power is. I want you to understand how he understands the gospel. Even in the midst of prison, even in the midst of loss, even in the midst of suffering, he is looking at the gospel and he's saying, man, I don't deserve this gospel. I don't deserve this gospel. I cannot understand how God chose to reveal this to me. I cannot understand how God saved me, how he adopted me. I cannot understand this. And so he stands looking at the gospel. He is humbled by the gospel. He is marveled by the gospel. He is standing in wonder of the grace of God in his life. He is not able to shake it off. He is amazed at it. He is overwhelmed by it. He is moved by the gospel. He is stunned by the grace of God. I don't deserve this grace, and yet God has graciously forgiven me, redeemed me, saved me, and adopted me. I am the least of all the saints. I am not worthy. Oh, but he has saved me. How did he save me? How did he save me? Jesus suffered. Jesus suffered for me in my place. Jesus took the eternal punishment that was deserved, that I deserve, but he took it. Jesus was abandoned. Jesus was rejected. Oh, I understand the gospel. Thank you, Jesus, for doing this for me. Because you've done this for me, it is okay if I suffer a little bit. You tracking me? He's saying it's okay. It's okay. Jesus, you were ridiculed. It's okay if I'm ridiculed. Jesus, you were put in chains. It's okay if I go to chains for a small time. Jesus, people mocked you. It's okay if I am getting mocked. My friend, the gospel, in light of what God has done for him, he is saying nothing else matters for him. Nothing else. And that is why he says in Philippians 1:22, right? Later on he says, for to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. It doesn't matter. What can you do to me? You want to put me in jail? Hey, I love Jesus. That's fine. I'm with Christ. You want to kill me? Man, it's even better. I will actually enjoy Christ even more. How is he thinking like this? Because there is a greater treasure for him. The gospel is his treasure. His identity is not in all of these position and job and success. No. It is not about reputation. It's not about what people think. Nothing matters for him. So when he goes through suffering, when he experiences loss in any of these things, he is not shaken. Why? Because he has a greater treasure. You tracking me? My friend, this is important. This is important. And sometimes we want reason, right? We are like, Ranjit, what is the reason? Why did the fracture happen? Why did it happen? Right? I'm sitting here and thinking in my house, why fracture is happening? Paul is telling me, Ranjit, it doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter why your leg fractured. Think of why God saved you. Think of that. You don't deserve it, but he saved you. Think of that. Think of that. It doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. So for Paul, it doesn't matter. He doesn't need any more reasons. Why, when, how. No. He is looking at the gospel. He says, that reason is enough. You tracking me? Man, this is important, right? Let me give you an example of 2 people. Let's say 2 people lose their job. 2 people lose their job, right? They're waiting for a promotion. 2 people, and they're looking for promotion, but suddenly something happens in the company, and they need to downsize. So they fire both of them. Both of them lose their job, right? Imagine one person doesn't know the gospel. They are trying to process this on their own, and another person understands the gospel. Both of them are suffering. Both of their suffering is the same. Both of them have lost a job. Both of them have families to take care of. Both of them don't know where the money is going to come from in the future. Both of their suffering and circumstances are the same. But it is very different how they process the suffering. The one who doesn't understand the gospel, right? One who doesn't understand, they're probably not familiar with these things. And so the way they process, for them, it is going to devastate them. They're going to be anxious and worried about the future. That they're going to be uncertain about what's going to happen. They may get upset with the boss or the company. They are devastated. They are crushed. Maybe they are filled with shame because they've lost their job, and how can they face their family? How can they face their friends? So it is going to crush somebody. Why? Because for them, their job was everything. And so when you lose it, it'll crush you. For the other person who understands the gospel, who understands Christ, and their heart is secure in what Christ is doing, they lose their job. Yes, they are sad. Yes, they are weeping. Yes, they get a little anxious. Yes, they are discouraged. But it doesn't crush them. It doesn't devastate them. Why? Because the job is not everything. Christ is everything. It completely changes how you process your suffering. Where does Paul get his power? Paul gets his power in the gospel. Paul gets his power in the gospel. My friend, I want to encourage you, right? If you're struggling, when you go through suffering and you're struggling, and it's a struggle for all of us. I struggle. Even as I pray, I struggle with self-pity. I struggle with doubt. Did you know John the Baptist had doubts when he's in prison, right? When they put him in jail. John the Baptist, who was the forerunner of Jesus, and he's in jail. And he doesn't know. And he sends word to Jesus and says, are you the one? Please tell me, are you the one? He had doubts. So there's nothing wrong in having doubts, but how you process it. And sometimes when we go through suffering, we are not able to understand. And I want to encourage you. This is the time you learn something. This is the time, right? So that you're prepared when you go through suffering, right? This is the time. When you go through suffering, you need to ask yourself, you need to look in and ask yourself, what is more important for me? What is my greatest treasure here? If you make anything apart from the gospel your treasure, you're going to be crushed. You're going to be disappointed. If you come to Jesus thinking you come to Jesus because he will help you, he will say, he will give you a job, he'll give you money, he'll give you position, and that's the reason we come to Jesus. Oh man, we are setting ourselves up for a great disappointment. No. But when you understand the gospel and what Jesus has done for you, you will say what Paul is saying. This is what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4:8. He says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven in despair. We are persecuted, but not forsaken. We are struck down, but not destroyed. There is power. There is power in the face of suffering. Secondly, right, there's power, right? There's the last one, second point. Not only power, right? Power, but Paul also is talking about a purpose in suffering. There is purpose in your suffering. There's a couple of purposes here. One, verse 10. Verse 10. He says, so that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. It's too much, right? Let's just think through this, right? Through the church, which is who? You. Through the church. Through you, who love the gospel, who know Jesus. Through you, the manifold wisdom, the brilliant wisdom of God might be made known. To who? To the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. Who is he talking about here? He's talking about angels and demons. I don't know whether you believe angels and demons and all of those things, but Paul is saying, through you, how you process suffering. You want to know the purpose? We don't know all the purposes for why we suffer, why God allows something. We don't know all of that. God is silent about it. Scripture is silent. We have to trust God, His goodness and His wisdom and His holiness and His righteousness in that. But you want to know a purpose? You really want to know a purpose? Here is a purpose, right? The purpose is angels and demons are watching how you suffer. And the way you suffer through the gospel and the way you suffer for Christ is going to display the wisdom of God before the watching angels. You tracking me? You know how we know this? Because it happened to Job. Remember, when Job suffered, he suffered in front of the heavenly courts. Heavenly courts, heavenly beings, including Satan was there, looking at how he's suffering. So in some way, we don't fully grasp this. We don't understand. But God says this in his word. In some way, my friend, what is the purpose? What is the purpose? Why am I called to suffer? Why am I called to suffer well, even as I go through? I can be cribbing, I can be cynical, I can be doing. But why? Why is God saying, Ranjit, lean into the gospel? Lean into the gospel. Understand that this is also allowed by me for you. You may not understand the whole situation, but just trust that I'm with you. So lean into the gospel. I have spared you of eternal punishment. Is it okay if you can go through a small fracture? Is that okay? Jesus, it's okay. But then God also tells me, God also reveals through his word, hey Ranjit, how you go through this suffering, there are angels and demons watching how you are processing your suffering, because that is going to reveal my greatness to them. No. too much. But he's saying another reason, right? We know that's too intangible for us. We forget this. The moment you go to work, you forget angels and demons and all that. Right? Let's look at verse 13. Verse 13, he gives you another practical reason. He says, so I ask you not to lose heart over what I'm suffering for you, which is your glory. He's saying, hey, forget about the angels and demons. Hey, I am suffering for you. My friend, all your suffering has a purpose. And it is purpose for the invisible, it is purpose for the visible. Now, you cannot say, I'm suffering and I will do what I want. You know what, I'm suffering. I will be nasty to people. I will be full of self-pity. I will just not come. I don't care what people say. I don't. Right? If you are suffering, we get into all this self-pity mode. But the Bible, God is saying, hey, Ranjit, no. Your suffering and how you deal with suffering has an impact on other people. It is for them. If you are nasty, if you are full of self-pity, if you are arrogant, if you are not willing to listen, if that's the way, it's going to impact. It's going to impact your wife, your spouse. It's going to impact your children. It's going to impact your friends, your attitude, and how you suffer. It's going to cause discouragement to people around you. It's going to cause discouragement to the church around you. It's going to cause discouragement to those who are watching you in terms of the witness of Christ, those who don't know God. How you as a believer is processing this suffering and not leaning into the power of the gospel, and you're becoming mad and angry at God and at people. It is significantly important. There is a purpose here. You may not agree with all the purpose, but it is a purpose. How you handle suffering. But in the same way, my friend, when you lean into the gospel and you understand and you love Jesus above all, and you say, this is okay. No, it is hurting. It is difficult. Yes, I've lost a job. Yes, I'm not able to get married. Yes, I don't have friends or whatever that is. Yes, it is challenging. But in light of the gospel, this is okay. When you process it with the gospel, Jesus changes you. Jesus changes you. You know what happens? You suffer like Jesus. You know what that means when you suffer like Jesus? When Jesus suffered, he was compassionate. He was kind. He was forgiving. He was patient. And when you suffer, when you process the gospel and you let the gospel shape your heart through your suffering, you will suffer like Jesus. You will be compassionate and kind and patient and persevering with people. And that is why Paul says, hey, my suffering is for all of you. How I process suffering is for all of you. I was reading this the story about Joni Eareckson Tada, right? Joni Eareckson Tada. I don't know if you're familiar with this person. She is a quadriplegic. She had an accident, a swimming accident, and since that young age, she's been paralyzed completely, right? And she follows Jesus. She loves Jesus. She's written a lot of books. And so at the early part of her accident, when she's in the hospital, she had another patient in the hospital with her, right? Her name was Denise. She was 16 years old. And Denise was basically somebody who was walking down the stairs in her school, and she slipped and she fell. And she fell a little unconscious. They took her home. In the evening, waist down, she became She felt numb. And the next day she woke up, she became numb, waist up. And within a couple of days, she was completely paralyzed. Okay? So Joni Erickson Tara is in the room, and along with her, there is this Denise who's sharing the room. And she would watch this, right? And so a lot of people came, and they would meet her and pray with her initially. But as time would go, nobody came. I mean, nobody would come and visit. And it was only her mother, Denise's mother, who would come and every day meet, read a portion of scripture, pray for her, and then go. Within a few days, Denise passed away. Now, Joni, who's also going through her own paralysis, is looking at this, and she is not happy. She's saying, what is the point of this suffering? She loves Jesus. Joni loves Jesus, and she's trying to process, but she's looking at Denise and her life, and she's saying, what is the point of the suffering? Nobody even sees her. Nobody even came to see her. What is the point of this suffering? And that's where she stumbles upon Ephesians 3. She stumbles upon Ephesians 3, and she begins to understand, no. It is not just those who watch her here. There is a greater purpose here. So she writes a note to Denise's mother. She takes a paper, she writes a letter to Denise's mother. In that, this is what she says. And one of the lines she says is, I'm sure angels and demons stood amazed at the uncomplaining patience of your daughter. My friend, how you process and go through suffering matters. You cannot do it on your own. But the gospel gives you power. The gospel gives you power. And I'm watching this show, and people keep thinking, and they ask me, right? Oh, you must be watching a lot of shows because your leg is fractured, and I am, right? So, so I'm watching this Crown. Crown is a nice show series on the royal family, and in a particular episode, it just caught me, right? And the episode, and I'm paraphrasing the dialogue. It's not the exact dialogue, but I'm paraphrasing it. But the essence of the dialogue is, the queen says, sovereign never weeps. Okay? Because in that role, they're saying sovereign, meaning the queen and the royal family, cannot show emotions, because through their emotions, they can kind of influence everybody else. So they have to contain their emotion. They have to contain the views. They cannot show. So sovereign can never weep in front of people. And yet, when I come to the Bible, I see the sovereign Son of God weeping. He is weeping when he goes to Lazarus' tomb. He is weeping when he looks at Jerusalem and he says, oh, I'm weeping for you. They're going to crucify him, and yet he is weeping for them. Hebrews says every time Jesus prayed, he prayed with loud cries and weeping. The sovereign of the world doesn't weep, but here we see Jesus weeping. Why is he weeping? Why is he crying? In fact, we see that when Saul, on the Damascus road, Saul is persecuting all the Christians, and he faces Jesus there, and Jesus tells him, the resurrected Jesus tells Saul, 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 why are you persecuting me? Saul is actually killing all the other people, but Jesus says, why are you persecuting me? My friend, it is personal for Jesus. When you suffer, it is personal for him. He's not standing outside and giving you some advice. No, he was broken for you. When you face ridicule, he understands because he was ridiculed for your sake. When you are broken, he understands because he was broken for your sake. When you are abandoned, he understands he was abandoned for your sake. When you feel like your prayer is not answered, you are longing and praying, but your prayer is not answered, Jesus understands because on the cross, his prayer was not answered. And it was not because Jesus sinned. It was not because Jesus did something wrong. No, he did that for your sake and my sake. You know why? You know why Jesus suffered? It is not so that you will not suffer. No, my friends, he did not say that. It is not that you won't suffer. Jesus suffered so that in your suffering, he will be with you. He will be with you. His power will be with you. The gospel will shine in your suffering. Jesus suffered, not that you won't suffer. Jesus suffered so that in your suffering he will be with you, and not just be with you, so that in your suffering you will be like him. You will be like him. for the sake of others.